INFJs often make unforgettable first impressions. There's something uniquely magnetic about them. People are drawn to INFJs like moths to a flame, sensing an emotional richness that's hard to come by. INFJs don't just enter a room, they resonate in it. Their ability to truly listen, to ask meaningful questions, and to make people feel deeply seen creates an immediate sense of intimacy. For many, this feels like finding emotional oxygen, like being understood in a way they didn't know they needed. And that's exactly where the paradox begins. Because the connection INFJs offer is so profound, it can be overwhelming, especially for people who aren't ready to meet that level of depth. At first, being around an INFJ feels healing. They see past masks. They sense emotional undercurrents. They hold space for vulnerability without judgment. And for someone who's used to surface-level interactions or emotional chaos, this can feel extraordinary. But the very intensity that makes an INFJ unforgettable in the beginning can become confronting over time. If you're an INFJ who needs clarity, alignment, and a deeper connection with your true self, ensure to check out our INFJ playbook. The link is in the description of this video. The truth is, many people don't know how to hold the kind of connection INFJs naturally create. What feels beautiful at first, being seen, being understood, being emotionally safe, can quickly turn into discomfort for someone who isn't emotionally grounded. The INFJ's insight, their ability to see beneath the surface, means you can't hide something from them. And not everyone is ready to be seen that clearly. INFJs reflect back not just who you are, but the parts of you might be avoiding. That can feel like exposure, like emotional nakedness. And if the other person isn't ready for that level of truth, their instinct might be to pull away. INFJs are also emotionally intense in a subtle, disarming way. They don't just skim the surface of relationships. They dive. They invest their energy into real bonding, not casual interaction. And they often do this early on, not because they're rushing, but because that's how they're wired. They value authenticity and resonance more than playing games. So while others may be figuring out if the relationship is worth exploring, the INFJ is already feeling it on a soul level. This can create an imbalance. One person is already emotionally engaged, while the other is still assessing. That disparity can cause fear, and fear often leads to retreat. There's also the INFJ's ability to mirror people's inner worlds back to them. This mirroring can feel like a spiritual experience. Suddenly you're talking to someone who gets you without needing explanations. Someone who finishes your sentences or asks the questions no one else dares to ask. And for many, this feels like magic at first. But when that mirror starts showing things you haven't yet accepted about yourself, insecurities, patterns, fears, it can feel confronting. Instead of leaning in, people often run. Ghosting becomes the easiest escape. Not because the INFJ did something wrong, but because they did everything right, and the emotional weight of that is too much for someone who isn't ready to carry it. The INFJ wasn't too much in the dramatic sense. They were too much in the true sense. Too real, too unfiltered, too emotionally honest. And in a world where most people are performing or surviving, that kind of emotional clarity can feel dangerous. There's also the tendency for INFJs to unintentionally trigger people's emotional avoidance patterns. INFJs are natural healers. They often attract those who are wounded, seeking, or lost. And while they're not trying to fix anyone, their mere presence becomes an invitation to feel. That's beautiful, but only if the other person is ready to heal. If not, the INFJ becomes a threat to the emotional equilibrium that person has built. Ghosting, then, becomes a form of self-preservation, a way to avoid the uncomfortable growth that being around the INFJ evokes. Another layer is how INFJs often don't chase. They may initiate with warmth and depth, but if they sense disinterest or inconsistency, they quietly withdraw. They won't beg to be chosen. They won't plead for attention. Their silence in the face of avoidance can be misinterpreted as detachment, when in truth, it's a form of emotional dignity. But for someone who isn't used to being mirrored or met so deeply, this calm retreat can feel like rejection, even though it was simply a response to imbalance. INFJs also have an inner world that's hard to penetrate. They can make others feel completely seen while revealing very little of themselves. This imbalance can cause confusion. The other person may feel exposed while knowing very little about the INFJ's inner workings. What felt like closeness at first may start to feel mysterious or even intimidating. Without clear understanding, some people interpret that mystery as emotional unavailability or distance, leading them to ghost rather than inquire. And sometimes, INFJs are simply too pure in their intention. They show up authentically, hoping for connection, but encounter people who are looking for distraction rather than depth. In those situations, the INFJ's emotional presence becomes too honest for someone still operating in survival mode. So the admiration they inspire in the beginning turns to fear, and fear often chooses silence over explanation. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that INFJs often blame themselves. They replay the conversations. They wonder if they were too much, too intense, too vulnerable. But the truth is, they were exactly what they said they were. They just offered something the other person wasn't ready to receive. They weren't ghosted because they lacked something. They were ghosted because they held too much. Most times, INFJs are first admired because they offer a glimpse into something real, something human, something sacred. But they're often ghosted because that level of emotional authenticity isn't meant for everyone. It's meant for those who are ready to do the inner work, who are willing to be seen, not just flattered, who want to build something, not just feel something fleeting. People often don't realize the kind of energetic exchange that's occurring when they interact with an INFJ. There's a softness to the INFJ's approach, an open heart, an attentive spirit. It doesn't come off as forceful or demanding. It feels gentle, respectful, and unusually safe. For many people, this feels new, refreshing, even euphoric. They find themselves telling the INFJ things they've never said out loud. They begin to feel witnessed in a way that feels sacred, maybe even fated. And that's where the emotional high starts. But emotional highs, when not built on a foundation of readiness, are unstable. The connection feels special, because it is, but that specialness requires depth, consistency, and courage to sustain. And when the novelty of being seen wears off, what remains is the vulnerability it revealed. The INFJ doesn't just reflect back someone's best traits. They often reflect back the emotional gaps, the inconsistencies, the unhealed parts that have been buried. To the person on the receiving end, this can feel like being emotionally exposed under a microscope, even when the INFJ is offering nothing but kindness and grace. INFJs rarely give surface-level affection. Even their curiosity has weight. When they ask questions, they're not trying to make conversation. They're trying to understand. They want to reach the why beneath the what. For people used to transactional or emotionally guarded relationships, this depth can feel confronting and overwhelming. It's like trying to make small talk with someone who keeps gently pulling you back to the truth. At first, it feels profound. Eventually, it starts to feel scary. And then there's the INFJ's emotional sincerity. They don't play games. They don't withhold to gain power. When they care, they show it. When they feel connected, they speak it. And while that kind of openness is exactly what many people claim to want, it's often too much for those who aren't emotionally available or haven't done the inner work to match that level of honesty. INFJs don't perform their feelings for approval. They reveal them as part of their truth. And that truth, however softly spoken, often asks a silent question. Can you meet me here? When the answer is no, some people ghost rather than admit they've reached their limit. There's also something paradoxical about how INFJs combine warmth with emotional independence. They can make you feel incredibly important, incredibly seen, and yet still carry an aura of self-sufficiency. They don't need you to complete them. They want connection, not codependency. But for someone who equates emotional closeness with control or neediness, this level of self-containment can be confusing. They may begin to question whether the INFJ feels as much as they do. They may project their own emotional insecurity onto the INFJ's calm demeanor and assume disinterest where there's actually deep feeling. INFJs also don't conform easily to emotional scripts. They don't follow the standard talk every day, text every hour kind of rhythm unless it feels authentic. They need space, not to disconnect, but to process, reflect, breathe. That rhythm, quiet but constant, deep but sometimes distant, can feel unsettling for people who equate love with constant access. When the INFJ pulls back to recalibrate emotionally, it can be misread as loss of interest. Instead of leaning into curiosity, some people panic and pull away altogether. INFJs are also very intuitive about energy. If they feel someone withdrawing, they won't chase. They'll observe, reflect, and often begin to pull their energy inward. They're used to being the emotional anchor, the safe place. But the moment they sense they're no longer wanted or welcome in that role, they retreat. Not out of spite, but out of emotional self-respect. And to the person on the other end, who once felt held and understood, that withdrawal can feel like abandonment, even though it was the INFJ who was being quietly pushed away all along. INFJs are often ghosted after giving someone a glimpse of their inner world. INFJs are guarded by nature. They don't let people in quickly. So when they open up, when they let someone see behind their composed exterior, it's a sacred act of trust. To be ghosted after that kind of vulnerability doesn't just sting, it can shatter something internal. Because it reinforces one of the INFJ's oldest fears. If people saw the real me, they would leave. INFJs live with a constant inner dialogue, one that analyzes every interaction, every facial cue, every silence. After being ghosted, they don't just feel the loss, they dissect it. They replay the conversations, searching for the moment they became too much. They wonder if their honesty was a mistake, if their presence overwhelmed, if they misread the entire relationship. And because INFJs often hold themselves to high standards of emotional responsibility, they carry more blame than they should. But here's the truth. INFJs are not ghosted because they're flawed. They're ghosted because their presence requires honesty. Their presence invites transformation. Their presence, though gentle, holds emotional gravity. It asks for depth in a world addicted to distraction. And not everyone is willing or ready to meet that depth. The irony is that many who ghost INFJs will remember them long after. Because INFJs aren't easily replaced. Their energy lingers. Their kindness echoes. Their insight stays with you. And for those who left out of fear, there's often a haunting sense of having turned away from something real, something rare. INFJs are first admired because they awaken something beautiful in others. But they are often ghosted because that awakening comes with a cost, the death of emotional pretense. And not everyone is ready to live without their armor. And that's not the INFJ's fault. That's the cost of being real in a world that often isn't. What deepens the heartbreak of being ghosted for INFJs is that they rarely enter relationships lightly. While others may explore relationships casually, INFJs tend to lead with emotional sincerity and soulful curiosity. They don't enter relationships for entertainment or escape. They connect to understand and to learn. When they give someone their energy, they've already spent time internally assessing the depth and potential of that relationship. By the time they express their interest outwardly, they've already emotionally committed inwardly. So when someone disappears without explanation, it's not just confusing. It feels like emotional whiplash. Ghosting cuts deeply into the INFJ's longing to be understood. They spend their lives offering space for others to be seen. To not even be granted a goodbye or an honest explanation feels like being erased. It's not just rejection. It's erasure of the emotional presence they brought into the relationship. And because INFJs carry so much of their connection internally, the loss doesn't just happen once. It replays. The silence isn't empty. It's loud. Every unanswered question, every unspoken word becomes a loop in their mind. And because they're so introspective, they feel not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the potential, the shared vision, the emotional blueprint that never had time to take form. What makes INFJs so susceptible to being ghosted isn't their weakness, it's their power. Their ability to tap into someone's emotional core so quickly can create a momentary illusion of closeness. The other person feels seen in a way they didn't expect. They feel emotionally naked and, at first, loved in that nakedness. But love like that isn't light. It's heavy. It's sacred. And unless the person on the receiving end is deeply rooted in self-awareness and emotional responsibility, they start to panic. They start to sense that they can't hide in this relationship, that they'll have to be honest, not just with the INFJ, but with themselves. And when that mirror becomes too bright, they shut the door. Many INFJs don't even realize how much emotional transformation they awaken in others. It's not that they're trying to change people. It's that their presence quietly demands depth. And most people are not used to being asked to show up in their truth. So they fall in love with the feeling the INFJ gives them, but they don't yet have the capacity to stay where that feeling leads. It's emotional whiplash for both sides. The INFJ offered their soul, and the other person touched it, then fled. And INFJs rarely chase, not because they don't care, but because they care deeply. Deeply enough to know that intimacy must be mutual, that safety must be shared, that emotional maturity is a two-way street. When someone ghosts them, they grieve. But they don't beg. They don't perform. They don't fight to be seen by someone who already chose to look away. That quiet dignity can be misread as indifference. But it is, in truth, one of the most profound acts of self-protection. Sometimes, the INFJ is ghosted not because of what they did, but because of what they represent. To meet an INFJ is to meet a mirror. And for someone who hasn't yet learned to love their own reflection, that can be terrifying. INFJs reflect back integrity, honesty, desire, wounds, dreams, and that kind of intimacy, even when offered gently, demands something in return. It demands presence, transparency, effort. For someone used to coasting in relationships or hiding behind charm, that expectation of realness becomes unbearable. So they ghost not because the relationship lacked value, but because it demanded more than they were ready to give. The next time someone disappears, the INFJ must remember, their intensity is not a flaw. Their honesty is not a liability. Their depth is not a burden. Some will drift away when the light reveals too much. But the ones who are ready, truly ready, will stay. If you're an INFJ who needs clarity, alignment, and a deeper connection with your true self, ensure to check out our INFJ playbook. The link is in the description of this video.